Warsaw Ghetto, Poland, April 19th, 1943. SS Officer Weber watched the resistance fighter's body fall into the mass grave and shoveled the dirt himself. Yet now the fighter stands in the moonlight, chest riddled with bullet holes, head twisted at an impossible angle, lips moving in an ancient prayer. And behind him, rising from every shadow, are hundreds more, each bearing their execution wounds, each remembering their killer's face. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale of justice that crawls from mass graves and stalks through memories. Some debts can only be paid in terror, and the dead of Warsaw are here to collect. Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began as a desperate act of defiance. By April 1943, the Nazis had already deported or murdered over 300,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto. When SS and police units entered the ghetto on April 19, 1943, to round up the remaining Jews for deportation, they encountered something unprecedented: organized resistance. Wehrmacht Lieutenant Karl Fischer sat at his desk in the commandant's office, methodically documenting the day's operations. His orders were simple: record everything for Berlin's archives. But his pencil trembled slightly as he wrote the evening's report, detailing how Sergeant Muller's squad had cornered and executed 12 resistance fighters in a basement on Miła Street. "Impossible," he muttered, reviewing the morning's casualty lists. 3 of those same resistance fighters had been documented as killed 2 days earlier. He had witnessed their bodies being thrown into a mass grave himself. Yet multiple reliable officers reported engaging them today. Fischer pulled out his personal journal, separate from the official reports. "Something is wrong in the ghetto," he wrote. "The numbers don't align. We keep killing the same fighters, yet their ranks never seem to thin. Last night, Private Schmidt swears he saw a man he shot point blank walk through a wall. The soldiers whisper about shadows that move against the wind, and voices singing ancient prayers in abandoned buildings. The resistance should have crumbled by now. Instead, every night brought new attacks from impossible directions, shadowy figures that shrugged off bullets, and the haunting sound of Yiddish prayers echoing through empty streets." Fischer's hands shook as he documented another peculiar incident: an entire squad found huddled in a corner, weapons unfired, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. A knock at his door made him jump. "Enter!" he called out, straightening his uniform. A pale-faced soldier stepped in, clutching a report. "Sir, another patrol lost in Sector 7. They reported being surrounded by fighters we executed last week." Then the radio went silent. Fischer felt a chill run down his spine as he added this to his growing list of unexplainable incidents. The official reports would say these men died fighting Jewish insurgents. But in his private journal, he wrote what the soldiers whispered in the dark: "The dead are rising in the ghetto, and they remember everything we've done to them." Sarah Abramovich, one of the few survivors of the uprising, later testified about the days leading up to the resistance. Her account, preserved in the Jewish Historical Institute archives, speaks of an elderly rabbi who tried to warn them about forces they might unleash. "Rabbi Zalman gathered us in the secret synagogue," she recalled. "He spoke of the Dybbuk, spirits of the vengeful dead who could possess the living. But these were different. He said that when hatred and injustice reach a breaking point, the Dybbuk could inhabit their own corpses, driven by unfinished purpose." The rabbi's warnings seemed like desperate folklore until the night of April 20th. Sarah watched from a hidden bunker as SS troops executed 20 resistance fighters in the courtyard of 23 Miwa Street. Among them was her brother, David. But as the Germans departed, something impossible happened. The bodies began to twitch, her testimony reads, not like the last spasms of death. This was different. Their eyes opened, but they weren't David's eyes anymore. Something ancient looked out from them. They rose, still bearing their fatal wounds, and walked into the darkness. That night, we heard German screams from their barracks. Wehrmacht reports from the following morning documented the discovery of 6 SS officers dead in their quarters. The official cause was listed as partisan attack, but Lieutenant Fischer's private journal tells a different story. No breaks in the perimeter. All doors locked from the inside. The men's weapons were fired, but we found only their own blood. On the wall, written in Hebrew, "We reject your graves." Rabbi Zalman's final warning, recorded in Sarah's testimony, proved prophetic. The Germans believe they face a few hundred desperate fighters, but they have awakened something that has waited centuries for vengeance. The dead of the ghetto will not rest while their murderers walk free. As if confirming these words, German casualty reports began documenting an unsettling pattern. Soldiers reported killing the same resistance fighters repeatedly, only to encounter them again, wounds still visible, moving with an unnatural grace. More disturbing were the numbers. The resistance seemed to grow stronger, despite confirmed kills exceeding the ghetto's known population. Sarah's testimony concludes with a chilling observation. We had prayed for divine intervention. Instead, we received divine vengeance. The Germans had created so many corpses, never imagining that each one could become a weapon against them. Lieutenant Fischer's journal entries grew increasingly erratic as April drew to a close. The methodical military officer's handwriting became unsteady, his observations frantic. He documented an incident that marked a turning point in the German forces' morale. April 23rd, patrol, led by Sergeant Mueller, encountered resistance in an abandoned synagogue on Tlamaki Street. Standard protocol, sweep and clear. But something went wrong. Their radio transmission, which I've replayed a dozen times, still chills me. Moving to second floor. Wait, someone's singing. A prayer? Mueller here. We've found... No, impossible. Karl, we executed you yesterday. Why are you... Open fire. Open fire. They don't fall. Dear God, the bullets pass right through. They're everywhere. Their faces are wrong. The transmission ended with screams. When a rescue team reached the synagogue, they found the entire patrol. Not dead. Worse. 8 hardened Wehrmacht soldiers huddled in corners, weapons unfired, muttering about men who couldn't die and eyes that glowed with ancient fury. Fischer interviewed the only coherent survivor, Private Werner Schmidt. They were like puppets, Schmidt whispered, hands shaking as he clutched his rosary. Moving all wrong, joints bent the wrong way. I recognized Abram Blum. I put 3 rounds in his chest myself last week. The bullets went through him, and he smiled. But it wasn't his smile anymore. The official report cited partisan psychological warfare tactics and possible chemical agents. But Fischer's private notes told the truth. These aren't resistance fighters anymore. The rabbis warned us. Every Jew we kill rises again. We're not fighting the living anymore. That night, Fischer witnessed it himself. Watching from his office window, he saw 3 figures walking through the ghetto's ruins. One wore the bloodied clothes of a man Fischer had personally executed that morning. As if sensing his gaze, the figure looked up. Its neck was bent at an impossible angle, but its eyes, ancient, vengeful eyes, met Fischer's. The lieutenant slammed the shutters closed, but he couldn't block out the sound of Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead, echoing through empty streets. "We thought we were fighting a few hundred desperate Jews," Fischer wrote, his usual precise handwriting now jagged with fear. "Instead, we've armed every corpse in Warsaw against us. God help us all." A recently declassified SS report dated April 25, 1943, reveals the German command's desperate attempts to explain the increasingly supernatural events plaguing their forces. SS Gruppenführer Jürgen Stroop, tasked with crushing the uprising, demanded rational explanations for the mounting irregularities in combat reports. The Jewish fighters are using the extensive tunnel networks beneath the ghetto, Stroop's report insisted. This explains the apparent appearances of previously eliminated resistance members. The so-called immortal soldiers are likely twins or lookalikes, a psychological warfare tactic. But Lieutenant Fischer's journal entries tell a different story. He documented a disturbing incident at the German field hospital. 3 soldiers brought in from night patrol. No physical wounds, but their hair had turned white. Dr. Meyer says their hearts simply stopped from fear. Before dying, one soldier kept repeating, "They remember everything. Every person we killed, every home we burned. They show you before they take you." The mental strain began breaking even hardened SS units. A patrol led by veteran SS Hauptsturmführer Klaus Wagner returned from Muranowska Street in hysterics. Wagner, decorated for brutality on the Eastern Front, was found sobbing in a corner. "I killed him," Wagner repeated. "I killed Rabbi Shapiro myself, watched him die, but there he was, leading them. His chest still had the wounds, but he was singing. They were all singing." Fischer's observations grew more fragmented. The singing never stops now. Ancient Hebrew prayers echo through empty buildings. Men wake screaming about dead eyes watching them. Found Private Bauer hanged in his quarters. His suicide note, "They show you your future. I saw what waits. Better to die by my own hand." An intercepted radio transmission, marked "Classified, Destroy after reading," captured the moment another patrol encountered the impossible. "Multiple targets ahead," confirmed resistance fighters. "But sir, these are the ones from the mass grave on Stocky Street. We buried them ourselves. They're climbing out of the walls. Their limbs, God in heaven, their limbs are all wrong. They're letting us see what we did to them. Please, please make it stop." Stroop's official reports continued attributing the incidents to Jewish terror tactics and combat fatigue. But his private communications to Berlin told a different story. "Something is wrong in Warsaw. The ghetto itself is turned against us. Every dead Jew becomes another soldier in an army we can't kill, because they're already dead." April 28th marked a turning point in the Warsaw ghetto. Sarah Abramovich's testimony describes a night when the boundary between the living and the dead completely dissolved. The Germans had planned a major assault to clear the resistance from the Muranov district. Instead, they encountered something that shattered their remaining sanity. The Germans came with tanks and flamethrowers, Sarah recalled. But as they approached Muranov, the dead rose to meet them. Not just recently killed fighters, every victim of their atrocities. Children clutching teddy bears, elderly rabbis still wearing prayer shawls, mothers holding infants, all bearing their fatal wounds, all moving with that terrible, broken grace. Lieutenant Fischer's final coherent journal entry captured the horror. The ghetto is alive with the dead. Sergeant Richter's unit tried to clear a building on Niska Street. They found an old woman they'd shot last week, sitting in a rocking chair. She turned her head completely backward to face them, smiled with too many teeth, and spoke in voices they recognized, the voices of resistance fighters they'd executed. A recovered Wehrmacht radio log documented the chaos that followed. Multiple units reporting contact with. Christ almighty, they're everywhere, coming through walls. Tanks aren't stopping them. Shells pass right through. They touch you and you see what you did to them. You feel what they felt. Oh God, the children we killed. Sarah's account continues. The Dybbuks soldiers led them, resistance fighters still bearing their execution wounds, moving like marionettes controlled by ancient hands. They didn't use guns anymore. They didn't need to. They just touched the Germans, showed them their own crimes, and watched them break. Fischer's handwriting became almost illegible. They're in the command post. Stroop is screaming about seeing his victims' faces. Major Weber shot himself after claiming dead children were crawling out of his mirror. The rabbis were right. We didn't just kill them, we gave them weapons. Every atrocity became a soldier in their army. The night culminated in an event so terrifying that surviving German records actively tried to suppress it. A mass grave near the Jewish cemetery erupted. Sarah described it. Hundreds of bodies we'd hidden there emerged, moving as one. The Germans tried to flee, but the dead remembered them. Each victim found their killer. The night filled with screams as the Germans faced the consequences of their crimes. An SS officer's final transmission, marked "Destroy immediately," but preserved in Wehrmacht archives, ended with, "They show you everything. Every person you killed, every crime you committed. They make you feel it all. This isn't resistance anymore. This is judgment." By April 30th, the German command structure began to collapse. SS Gruppenführer Stroop's veneer of control shattered as multiple units refused to enter the ghetto at night. His final official report betrayed increasing desperation. Men are deserting. They claim the dead hunt them in their dreams, requesting immediate reinforcements and psychiatric personnel. Lieutenant Fischer documented the failed attempts to contain the situation. They tried sealing off Miwa Street with concrete barriers. By morning, we found the barriers shattered from the inside out. The walls themselves bleed now. Private Schultz saw his victims' faces emerging from the bricks, all the bodies we'd walled up in our haste to hide the evidence. He shot himself rather than face them again. A surviving SS guard, Otto Kraus, later testified at Nuremberg about that night. We fortified the command bunker with steel and concrete, posted triple guards. It didn't matter. They came through anyway. Feldwebel Meyer recognized a Jewish teacher he'd executed. The teacher's head was still at the angle Meyer had left it, but he spoke with the voices of a dozen victims. They made Meyer feel everything he'd done to them. His heart burst in his chest. The desperate Germans tried burning entire blocks, hoping to drive out what they now openly called the dead ones. Sarah Abramovich's account describes the futility. The flames parted around the Dybbuk soldiers like water. They walked through fire untouched, their bodies still bearing the wounds of their first deaths. The Germans' weapons turned against them. Every method they'd used to kill us became another way for the dead to reach them. Fischer's increasingly frantic notes capture their hopelessness. Hauptmann Wolf barricaded himself in the records office, said the dead were showing him ledgers written in blood, listing every crime, every killing. When we found him, his hair had turned white. He'd clawed out his own eyes, claiming he couldn't stop seeing their faces. A recovered radio log records the final attempt to evacuate. Multiple units retreating to extraction point, No. They're in the tunnels too. Oh God. All the bodies we dumped down there. They're rising. They remember. They all remember. The children are the worst, showing us what we did. Please, someone. The dead are everywhere. Sarah's testimony concludes this phase. The Germans' own atrocities became their prison. Every tunnel they'd filled with bodies became impassable. Every mass grave erupted. Every wall they'd used to hide their crimes now hid something much worse. Their victims had become their judges, and there was no appeal. Lieutenant Fischer's last journal entry is dated May 1st, 1943. The handwriting is barely legible, the pages stained with what forensics later confirmed was both ink and blood. They're coming for me now. I hear them in the halls, the shuffle of broken bodies, the whispers of the dead. The rabbi I shot last week leads them. His neck still hangs at the angle of his execution, but his eyes, God help me, his eyes hold centuries of judgment. The entry continues with increasing desperation. I tried to be thorough in my documentation, wanted Berlin to know everything, but now I understand. The dead remember more accurately than any witness. They carry every detail of their murders, and soon they'll make me carry those memories too. Sarah Abramovich's final testimony describes that night. The Dybbuks soldiers moved through the German headquarters like smoke through a grate. We heard the screams as each officer faced their victims. Not just the people they'd killed in Warsaw. Somehow, the dead knew everything. Every crime, every killing, every moment of cruelty. They showed the Germans exactly what they'd done, made them feel what their victims felt. A recovered SS security recording, its audio distorted by static, captured Fischer's last moments. They're outside my door. I recognize them all. The old man from the synagogue, the mother from the roundup, the children. Oh God, the children from the orphanage. Their wounds are still fresh, but their eyes are ancient. They want me to see, to understand. No, please, I was only following. The recording ends with a sound that analysts still debate. Something between a scream and a prayer. Fischer's body was never found. His office showed signs of a struggle, but the only evidence was a message written in Hebrew on his desk calendar. Justice remembers longer than history. Sarah's account concludes. By morning, the German command structure had collapsed. Those officers who survived were changed forever, their minds shattered by the weight of their own memories, now experienced from their victims' perspective. Some babbled about children emerging from mirrors. Others couldn't stop feeling the deaths they'd inflicted. The official Wehrmacht report listed the command staff as missing in action, but a classified addendum, recently declassified, notes, investigation of German headquarters inconclusive. Multiple officers found in catatonic state, repeating same phrase in Hebrew. Translates to, the dead remember, and now so will we. Decades later, night guards at the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial still report hearing ancient prayers in empty streets. Sometimes, they glimpse figures moving through walls, bearing wounds that never healed. And in the archives, Fischer's blood-stained journal serves as a warning. Some debts can only be paid in memories, and the dead have perfect recall. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left you looking over your shoulder, wondering about the true price of historical atrocities, take a moment to join our ranks. Check your mirrors tonight. Are you sure those reflections are yours alone? Subscribe to uncover more supernatural, military histories that official records dare not mention. Hit that notification bell. You'll want to know when our next classified file reveals itself. Share this story with those who understand that sometimes the dead have longer memories than the living. Leave a comment below. Have you ever encountered a place where history feels too present? Perhaps you've heard whispers in abandoned military installations, or felt unseen eyes watching from empty buildings. Remember, not all soldiers rest when the war ends, and some still walk their posts long after death.